He was a barman, then a car salesman. He had no intelligence training, no government clearance, no connection to MI5, Scotland Yard, or any law enforcement agency on Earth. But for more than a decade, he convinced at least 9 people, including a lawyer, a psychologist, and a solicitor, that he was a deep-cover British intelligence operative. And they believed him. Not for a day, not for a week, for years. Some abandoned their careers, some cut off their families, some handed over their life savings. One of them was a trained psychologist whose profession was understanding human behavior. Every one of them entered a reality that did not exist. A reality created by a single man. A man who never worked for any intelligence agency. A man whose greatest weapon was not a gun, a badge, or political power. It was persuasion. This is one of the most extraordinary cases of coercive control ever documented, and it raises a deeply uncomfortable question. How does a car salesman convince intelligent adults to abandon their own reality and live inside his? His name was Robert Hendy-Freegard. Robert Hendy-Freegard was born on the 1st of March 1971 in Dronfield, Derbyshire, England. Nothing about his early life suggested what was coming. There was no intelligence background, no military service, no extraordinary education. He worked as a barman, he worked as a car salesman. By all outward appearances, he was completely ordinary. Yet within a few years, university students would abandon their education, professionals would surrender their savings, and intelligent adults would begin taking instructions from him as though their lives depended on it. It all started with a story. In the early 1990s, Freegard was working as a barman at a pub in Newport, Shropshire, near Harper Adams University College. There, he befriended a group of students. At first, he seemed friendly, charismatic, and unusually confident. Then he shared a secret. He was not really a barman. He was an undercover MI5 intelligence officer. According to Freegard, he had been placed at the pub to monitor suspected IRA activity connected to the student population. And because the students had become close to him, they were now at risk. The IRA knew who they were. They were being watched. Their lives were in danger. To survive, they needed to follow his instructions exactly. They believed him. At first, the requests seemed reasonable. Be careful who you talk to. Do not discuss sensitive information. Avoid certain people. Stay alert. Then the demands became larger. Leave university. Cut off contact with your family. Move to another city. Hand over money for operational expenses and safe accommodation. By the time the requests became extreme, the students had already accepted the premise that their lives were in danger. And once someone accepts the premise, they often accept the instructions that follow. The students left university. They severed contact with loved ones. Some lived in poverty. Some slept on park benches. Meanwhile, Freegard was funding a far more comfortable lifestyle with their money. What made the situation even more remarkable was that the university students were not isolated cases. Freegard was discovering that the same methods worked on almost anyone, including intelligent adults with careers, life experience, and no connection whatsoever to the original group. In 1995, he met Elizabeth Bartholomew at a Sheffield car dealership. He persuaded her to take out loans to settle her debts. Then, according to court evidence, he manipulated her into circumstances where she was sleeping on park benches while he retained control of the money. In 1996, he met Leslie Gardner. He claimed he needed money to buy off IRA killers who had supposedly been released under political agreements in Northern Ireland. Over the next 6 years, she handed him approximately £16,000. Then came Caroline Cowper, a lawyer, someone trained to analyze evidence and assess credibility. In 2000, she met Freegard at a car dealership in Chiswick, West London. He assisted her in changing her vehicle, pocketed money from the transaction, then stole £14,000 from her building society account. The relationship became romantic. They became engaged. The wedding was only prevented after intervention from her family. But the most remarkable case was still to come. In 2002, Freegard met Kimberly Adams, an American child psychologist living in London. Her profession involved understanding behavior, influence, and manipulation. If anyone should have recognized what was happening, it was her. She did not. She fell in love with him. Freegard told her he had infiltrated a criminal organization. He claimed he had killed a man who threatened to expose him. He convinced her that she, too, could become part of the intelligence world. All she needed was training. The training was expensive. Her stepfather had recently won a significant lottery prize. Freegard knew this, and he took the money. For years, the deception continued. Multiple victims, multiple identities, hundreds of thousands of pounds. Yet despite the scale of the operation, Freegard continued to avoid exposure. Then one family refused to let the story end. Kimberly Adams's relatives became increasingly alarmed by her disappearance and repeated requests for money. They contacted authorities. The case eventually drew the attention of the FBI, which coordinated with Scotland Yard. After more than a decade of manipulation, Freegard's world was finally beginning to collapse. On the 20th of October 2003, he was arrested at Heathrow Airport. He was accompanied by another victim at the time. Freegard denied every allegation. The trial at Blackfriars Crown Court lasted 8 months. On the 23rd of June 2005, he was convicted of 2 counts of kidnapping, 10 counts of theft, and 8 counts of obtaining money by deception. The total amount taken from victims was close to £1 million. Judge Deva Pillay sentenced him to life imprisonment. For many observers, the story appeared to be over. It was not. 2 years later came the twist that made the case even more controversial. Freegard appealed. His argument was unsettlingly simple. His victims had traveled with him voluntarily. They had obeyed him voluntarily. They had handed over money voluntarily. He had manipulated them, but he had not physically forced them to stay. The Court of Appeal agreed that the legal requirements for kidnapping had not been met. His kidnapping convictions were overturned. His life sentence was revoked. In May 2009, he was released after serving less than 4 years. And almost immediately, the pattern returned. In 2011, using the name David Hendy, he entered a relationship with a British woman named Sandra Clifton after meeting her through an online dating service. According to later reports and legal proceedings, he gradually isolated her from family members and repeated many of the same manipulative behaviors that had characterized his earlier offenses. Only the name had changed. The method remained the same. Then, in February 2025, Freegard was convicted in France of violence against public officials with aggravating circumstances and sentenced to 6 years in prison. He is currently incarcerated in France. At this point, the obvious question remains: how did any of this work? How does a car salesman persuade intelligent adults to surrender their money, relationships, careers, and independence? The answer appears repeatedly throughout the case. First, authority without verification. Freegard did not simply claim to be a spy, he behaved like one. He was secretive, controlled, intense. He spoke in fragments. He created urgency. And most importantly, he made verification feel dangerous. To question him was to risk exposure. To investigate him was to endanger the operation. He transformed skepticism into a perceived threat. Second, emotional intimacy. Knowledge and expertise do not disappear when people fall in love, but they often stop being applied objectively. A psychologist in love is not analyzing a case study. She is experiencing a relationship. The emotional bond becomes more powerful than professional knowledge. Third, isolation. Freegard systematically removed alternative sources of reality. Friends, family, colleagues. Anyone capable of challenging the story became a threat. Once isolated, victims had only one remaining source of information: him. And when one person controls information, they begin controlling reality. The most unsettling part of this story is not that some people believed him. It is that the people who believed him looked exactly like the people most of us assume would never fall for something like this: a lawyer, a solicitor, a psychologist, educated adults with careers and responsibilities. The case forces us to confront an uncomfortable possibility. Intelligence does not make someone immune to manipulation. In some circumstances, it may simply provide better tools for rationalizing it. Freegard did not use weapons. He did not use physical force. He used something far more common: the need to trust, the need to belong, and the fear of facing a dangerous world alone. He offered people a story that made them feel chosen, special, part of something secret and important. Then he made them pay for that feeling, for years. Next week on the Criminal Blueprint, she did not join a cult. She enrolled in a self-improvement program. By the time she realized what was happening, she had been branded. Keith Raniere and Next IVM, When Self-Help Becomes a Cage.